Kate Falcha. Welcome to Irish Granny Helen, and it's time for our Saturday book, and we are deep into The Real Marilyn Monroe by Larry Jordan, debunking the myths and revealing intimate new details of her life and death. This story just keeps getting weirder, and Larry has done such a job of verifying, following up, tracking down people. I can't believe the people he's spoken with. This is, it happened a long time ago. So he found people still alive involved in the case. Housebell, the fan. I'm sure I said that wrong. So we are very far into the book. Don't have too many more videos to go, and I'm very happy to announce that I have been in touch with the author, Larry Jordan, and he has graciously agreed to come and have a chat about this opus. It's such an epic book. I just have been fascinated by it, and I know a lot of you have too. I'm happy about that. It could have gone very wrong if no one liked it and it was 75 million videos. So actually this is video number 16. And I'm anticipating a couple of more weeks before we finally get to our conversation with the author. Stick around. This plot, it's just not to be believed. I mean, I believe it, but it's absolutely incredulous, unbelievable, in a metaphorical kind of way. Okay, so let's get going. We are on chapter 44. I'm trying very hard not to mention certain names very often. I don't want to trigger any attention here. So I think you all know who I mean when I say the AG. His name is in the title, and it's he wasn't going to give up. And I think you all understand why we're trying to be discreet about these people, because families with a lot of power still exist. And, Okay, so the book is talking about, there's a great picture here of her writing in her diary. For anybody who might doubt, that was a reality in her life. She was a great diarist. This man that I used to really have such high opinion of, his feet of clay, apparently he was what they call a pit bull. His history proves that he would do whatever it took to achieve his goals in whatever ruthless way that was. It seems the plan was, now this is all, I'm sorry Larry, but I have to say this. This was all alleged. There seems to be quite a bit of documentation and proof, but this is the story, okay? It seems that the plan was to sedate Marilyn, and while she was under, search her house, and she wouldn't be giving them any trouble. Jordan made the observation, and I thought this was pretty astute, she wouldn't have died if he hadn't come and threatened her that day. This whole thing wouldn't have happened. But no, he had to come from Gilroy on a plane, 45-minute, leave the family at a ranch and come down to LA to strong arm. And that's exactly what happened. He could count on Pat Newcomb's help. So let's read what that means. Paul Brogan, the young friend of hairstylist Sidney Gilaroff, and Gilaroff plays an important role here, as you'll find out. Paul Brogan said in an interview for this book, so he was interviewed by Larry, Sidney hated Pat Newcomb almost as much as he disliked Paula Strasberg for what he felt was an unhealthy hold on Marilyn. I knew Sidney long enough and saw him interact with enough industry folks to feel he was pretty accurate in his observations. And this is a question we'll need to pursue. Greason, Dr. Greason, the most unprofessional doctor in the history of mankind, could be counted on to help control her, as could Eunice Murray. So everyone everyone seemed to have their own agenda, his or her own agenda. And there was a convergence of interests, and so they worked together. And we're discussing the AG, the doctor, the housekeeper. They all had issues. Marilyn was at real risk at the hands of the brothers or their cabal, especially because Earl Wilson and Dorothy Kilgallen, two journalists, had been exposing these relationships and talking about them, hinting rather broadly what resident of a large White House in Washington, D.C., you know, that kind of thing. This could have kicked off an avalanche of media interest in this illicit goings-on with these supposed family men, and it could have blown an awful lot of things to the heights, and they may have wanted to put a damper on that. There are secret tapes of POTUS, we know who I'm talking about, in private that show that he was really high-strung and impulsive and hot-tempered and easily rattled by threats to his dignified public image. And I fell for the image. I fully confess, which goes to show you we're all potential victims of brainwashing and propaganda. None of us is immune. He was easily irritated, quick-tempered, short-tempered, hot-headed, and he would bark orders and demands on all those around him in protection of his own self-interests. He cursed the military for revealing that they had this is such a bizarre thing to get worked up about. The military had a contingency hospital set up at Camp David, at Hyannisport, in case Jackie went into labor while the family was at Hyannisport. Now, she'd had difficulties in the past, and they were aware of that. And so the military doctors responsible for the health of the president's family decided that in the interests of an abundance of caution, they set up the equipment and medications and stuff that they would need if there was a sudden obstetrical emergency with the wife of the President of the United States, called preventative medicine. He lost it and was swearing and carrying on. Weakness, right? Didn't want to show weakness. He even vowed revenge on the telephone against the soldier who created this thing, who came up with this plan. And it turned out, when he eventually found out that there was no soldier to blame, that the plan came from Jackie's doctor. Kennedy had a big fear that any story might make him look bad. And it was not hard to imagine either of them shutting her up for that reason. So the AG and Lawford left, and this is late afternoon, maybe 4-ish. I don't remember exactly because I read a little bit ahead. He came and strong-armed her with Peter Lawford. Jeffries was there. He had been helping in the garden and doing handyman stuff. The son-in-law of Eunice Murray. I couldn't remember her name. And Pat Newcomb. And they tried to calm Marilyn down after, she was threatened. Eunice called Greenson. Come over here quick. She's upset. There's poor reporting since then that he merely spoke with Marilyn on the phone. He did not. He came over in person. He said that she was upset because she couldn't sleep but it's 4:30 in the afternoon. So this seems like a very odd, later this was his excuse. Why he came over. Oh, well, she just couldn't sleep. Well, it's in the afternoon. He said that she was mad, that Pat Newcomb had taken the pills the night before and slept twice as long as Marilyn had, because Marilyn also took sleeping pills and they had not been effective. This is the story the doctor is concocting. He didn't mention that little visit and the encounter and the angst involved in that. Later, Pat Newcomb was furious and she denied the story about the sleeping pills. She said, "What are you talking about?" She said, "I sleep without pills. I don't take sleeping pills." And she said his statements about his own patient are unethical. Well, yeah, it's the least of it. The doctor said, "I made her drink a large Coke, and the question is, was she drugged in this Coke? This is just a question. Why did he feel it was necessary to say that?" The AG and Lawford returned to the beach house in Santa Monica, and then he called Marilyn. And there are Otash, the guy who was surveilling the house. I mean, there are about 25 people for different reasons. I'm exaggerating. Surveilling her and surveilling the brothers. And they're all, spy versus spy. Otash was doing it. I'm kind of confused because it's been a while since I've read so much of this. It's a jumble. I'm thinking he was doing it for Hoffa, I think. Could be I'm totally wrong. But he was surveilling her. And he had tapes. And people have heard these tapes. And the AG called her. And she said, "Stop bothering me. Stay away from me." Another guest at Lawford's heard this story from AG to Lawford. He said to Lawford, "Get her to your place. She won't talk to me right now. You get her to the beach." So they're trying to get control over her physically and of what she has to say. The doctor had urged Marilyn to go to the beach. Was this a coincidence, or was he following AG's orders? He later said that she suggested going to the beach for a walk after he said, "I don't think that's a good idea. People will recognize you. Why don't you drive up the coast highway with Eunice?" It seems like this plan was just to get her out of the house. And then the AG could return and search the house. They were desperate to get any kind of written information or tapes or whatever that might implicate them in anything unseemly. That's what this is all about. So Ralph Roberts, her good friend, he was going to come to barbecue on Sunday. And he called Marilyn before because he was going to the store. And when he called, Greenson answered and said, "Marilyn's not here." And Ralph got suspicious. He was getting ready to buy things for the barbecue the next day. And having been in touch with her a lot, it didn't seem correct that she would not be home. Pat, Dr. Greenson, and Murray all agree that Marilyn had told Pat Newcomb that she had to leave, like fired. But Pat stayed and was there when the AG and Lawford showed up, but at the same time said he wasn't in town. So they're contradicting each other right and left. Grayson said he got a call to come to her house around 5:15 and that Newcomb was still at the house at that time. But Newcomb contradicts and said she left the house at 3, and if she had left the house at 3, then she would have deniability about knowing anything about the drop-in visit of the AG. So liars, liars, pants on fires, all of them. Dr. Greenson claimed that he left Marilyn's house at 7 p.m. in time for plans he had with friends and his wife, and no one even admitted that they were the friends. They never were able to confirm this because there were no friends. So did he stay after 7 and lie about it? Did Pat stay? There's just the sense that they were there a lot longer than they claimed they were there. The LA Times said that Pat had dinner with Marilyn and then left at 7 p.m. That's not true either. At first, Eunice said that Marilyn had dinner with Pat, and after Pat left, Marilyn stayed in her room and played music. So was Greenson still there? Because that's what he's kind of implying, he was there, but probably not. These contradictory accounts are told in the LA Times, in Variety, the industry magazine. So Pat Newcomb left about 8 o'clock for her date, and Marilyn ate alone, and she had ordered in and ate alone, is the reality of it. So, just for fun, let's ask, who was Pat's date? Was this an alibi that Patricia Newcomb cooked up? Did she need an alibi? Why would she need an alibi? For what? What was going on in this house? So their story changed again, that there was no dinner with Pat Newcomb and Marilyn, that she was going on a date for dinner. So eventually the accepted story morphed into this version. Dr. Greenson and Pat left at 7. Marilyn went to bed. Nobody had dinner. And she got up shortly after she went to bed to answer a call with Joe DiMaggio. So here's the story. You know, this is in the days before cell phones. She didn't have an extension in her room, which is so weird. She's Marilyn Monroe, you know. You think she could have another phone, but she didn't have a phone in her room. She had one phone in the house, and it had enormous long cord. And it was in the hall, I guess. And she would go out and answer the phone, which we think about now. You have to get out of bed to answer your phone. God, life was tough. But she would often cart it around the house, and it had a leash on it. It had a cord on it long enough to go all over the house, and she would take it into her bedroom and get into bed and have the phone in the bed with her. So that's the true story. So she got out of bed to answer the phone to talk to Joe DiMaggio. That's one version. Here's another one. Jean Leon, the owner of her favorite restaurant, La Scala, got a phone call that night from Marilyn Monroe. Now this, you pretty much believe what this guy is saying, I think, because what's in it for him to lie? He's a restaurant owner. He got a call from Marilyn asking him to personally deliver her favorite fettuccine, that she was dining at home with the AG. She told him this. It is unclear whether she said those words, he saw the AG there when he came, or he just heard rumors. So this is what he's saying. The autopsy showed her stomach was completely empty. I'm sorry, my dogs are barking. Of course, my neighbors pick right now to fuss in the yard, and my dogs are on red alert because the neighbors are breathing oxygen too close to our house. Sorry. So her autopsy showed that her stomach was empty. So did she order food and then just not eat it? Did she throw up and empty her stomach? Did they pump her stomach? The cops saw Eunice throwing food out. They didn't pursue that. I mean, there was all this activity going on in this house, a little bit like JonBenet Ramsey's house, you know. Oh, there's been a kidnapping? Well, let's invite everybody we know in the world over, and they're going to wash dishes and make food and set up like a buffet. Well, the same thing happened here. The cops show up, there's a dead body in the other room, and Eunice starts to tidy up and throw food out. You would think the cops would stop that interference with the crime scene. But anyway, why would this famous restaurant owner and his chef both lie? Because this is the story from both of them. Now, Earl Wilson, the reporter, said that Lawford told the cops that he phoned Marilyn between 6 and 7, but Dr. Greenson was there, and that's not likely because the doctor never mentioned being there at that time. So they didn't get their stories straight, and they were contradicting each other. Lawford was quoted as saying, "She picked up the phone herself on the second ring, which leads me to believe she was fine. She did sound sleepy, but I've talked to her 100 times, and she sounded no different." However, there's no police report that says any of this. No police report that Lawford was interviewed at that time. So did Lawford lie to the reporter to concoct a story for public consumption? It also said that Marilyn called earlier to ask to ask to get Patricia's number in Hyannis, and I think that means Pat Lawford's number, not Pat Newcomb, Pat Lawford's number in Hyannis. This has never been pursued, never been investigated. All these things, just incredibly limited investigation. So what was that about? Was the call made? Did she really ask for Patricia Lawford's number? Was she really hunting for the older brother's number? Because he was there in Hyannis. Or did she call him to complain about AG? The White House switchboard had been told, do not put her calls through anymore. And was Lawford and she didn't know this. This is the new rule. Was Lawford creating a cover story to explain away any phone record of a call from Marilyn to Hyannis? Was he trying to just explain it away ahead of time? Damage control? They did find that number, the number to Hyannis, to their compound, was on her phone records, which wasn't found till much later. They found a crumpled piece of paper in her bedding, and it was the older brother's phone number. So and it confirms that he confirmed later that she called him there. So there are 3 separate confirmations that a call was made, but no investigation into it, so I don't understand. At 7:15, Joe DiMaggio Jr. managed to get through on the phone to Marilyn. Eunice woke her to talk, and she sounded like she had been asleep, but she'd only been in 15 minutes in her room without Pat and Dr. Greenson, if you believe this timeline. So that's pretty fast going to sleep for somebody who had chronic insomnia. She got up, she sat on the floor, and had a lively conversation with Joe Jr., then at the floor in the hall. Then she carried the phone into her room and continued the conversation. The conversation was about him deciding not to get married. He called her because he broke up with his fiance. And Marilyn was pleased. Apparently she didn't like this fiance. After the conversation, she told Eunice she was not going to, they together were not going to the beach the next day. And then Marilyn went back into the bedroom and shut the door. So this is a lie. How do we know this is a lie? This is what Eunice Murray told the police. This is how Marilyn behaved the last time Eunice saw her. This is a lie because Marilyn would not have explained to Eunice Murray, oh, by the way, sorry, we're not going to the beach, because she'd fired Eunice earlier in the day. She had no plans to go anywhere with her the next day. Eunice never mentioned that to the cops. Joe Jr. said that Marilyn seemed normal and in good spirits. He was in deep shock to hear of her death. He told police that when he spoke with her on the phone Saturday night, he detected nothing wrong and said Marilyn seemed quite normal and in good spirits. When he arrived at the Greyhound bus station in Santa Monica the following Tuesday, so as to be able to attend Marilyn's funeral the next day, he told the press he was deeply shocked. He said when he spoke with Marilyn, she sounded great, in fine form, and if anything was amiss, I was not aware of it. He said he noted nothing peculiar in her mood. She sounded like Marilyn. Phone records showed that her call with Joan Jr. was 1 hour and 15 minutes and earlier than Murray had said. What was going on that Eunice lied about the timing. Why did she lie about the timeline? To explain what had been happening during that time. It was a phone call. What was she covering for? What was really going on at 8:30 at that house that night? Greenson claimed Marilyn called him to tell him about Joe Jr. Was this a cover to hide his to hide his firing? Because she fired him too. She fired all these people. He said all was well when he met with Marilyn. Later, he told Dr. Chris in a letter that Marilyn called to ask him why did he take away her Nembutal, and he was surprised because he didn't know she was taking Nembutal. So, if you remember, have we gotten to that part yet? I can't remember what we've talked about and what I've just read on my own. Well, it's no spoiler. We all know what happened in the end. They found like 8, I think, empty bottles of medication on her bedside table, this little tiny bedside table, all these empty bottles. And the implication being, oh, look, she emptied the bottles into herself. Does not appear that that's what happened, and we're going to find out here what might be more true. Was he trying to dissociate himself when he wrote this letter to Dr. Chris? Was he trying to dissociate himself from Marilyn and the drug, telling Dr. Chris, getting it on record, I didn't know she was on Nembutal. He was providing her with Nembutal. He's supposed to have weaned her off of it and was giving her chloral hydrate instead. It appears that maybe she was getting both. But this is a lethal combination, and he didn't seem concerned, that there were prescriptions for both of these things sitting around. There was a missing bottle of Nembutal, and apparently Marilyn had asked him, did he take it? And was this bottle taken by the person who gave her a lethal dose of something, and Dr. Greenson was covering for that? There's just a mystery about what drugs were legitimate, what drugs should have been there, what drugs did she take, who took the drugs that were missing, because they weren't inside her. There was a level of medication inside of her, but they weren't pills. And I'm getting hiccups again. Sorry, I'll try not to hiccup. Very prone to hiccups. I'll try not to hiccup. At 7:30, Lawford had dinner guests, and they heard him take a call from Marilyn Monroe. And when he came back to the table, he said, oh, that's just Marilyn again. There was no alarm in his voice, and the maid also confirmed this. The first public statement that Lawford made about all of this was that she had been in a good mood and sleepy, and then later his story said she sounded suicidal. And later on, the versions became absurdly more embroidered. Between 8 and 8:30, Sidney Guilaroff was the last person to talk with her. Remember I said this was a significant person to be talking to her. He described one more conversation he had on the phone with Monroe just minutes before her life ended. Quote, it was between 8 and 8:30 that I spoke once again with Marilyn. She was feeling much better and had met with her psychiatrist, Dr. Greenson, who I frankly detested. I tried to diffuse her anxieties about her argument with the AG, and I think now that I've totally misunderstood the situation. I dismissed it then as merely a lover's quarrel. We planned on talking again the next day, and I suggested we drive up to the Holiday Inn and talk the whole thing over. And that note here, the author's note, is he probably meant the Holiday House, which was a restaurant and a motel on Pacific Coast Highway that was kind of a hideaway for Hollywood stars. She ended the conversation with a provoking comment. You know, Sidney, she said, I know a lot of secrets about the K family. What kind of secrets? I asked. Dangerous ones, she said, and then she hung up. And keep in mind, her phone was heavily bugged, so this was not a private conversation. Was the AG told what she said in real time? Did this seal her fate? We don't necessarily have answers, just throwing that out there. At 8:30, she was awake, fully coherent, not depressed, not under any medication. Within the next half an hour, there's evidence to believe that she was given a drug-laced enema. More on that here in a second. Chapter 45, the shell game. How am I doing here on time? Some kind of notice. Okay. Allegedly, that night, Lawford and his pals Milton, Evans, and Rudin. Now, Rudin is the lawyer who was Dr. Greenson's brother-in-law. They had a conversation about Marilyn, how she wanted to do herself in and how depressed she was. They were really worried about her. Nobody went to check on her. This is the story they told the cops. It's alleged that Lawford called Evans and said he was worried about Marilyn, and he offered to call Rudin to find out. Evans offered to call Rudin to have Rudin call Marilyn to find out how she was doing. This is about 8:45. So, 15, 20 minutes later, Rudin called and had Eunice go check on Marilyn. And she said, oh, she's fine. So the police report have all the times are estimated. They're not accurate. And nobody ever checked the report against the phone records. Why wouldn't Lawford have called her second? Oh, I guess she did have a second line. I don't remember reading that. How come he didn't call her second line? Why would he think that she'd answer for other callers and not for him? There's just these weird inconsistencies in these stories that make no sense. How could Rudin, the lawyer, get through to Eunice so easily when Lawford couldn't call? And he had claimed, can you call for me because I can't get through, kind of thing. It seems like it was a ruse to prove Lawford's concern for Marilyn and about her state, and to establish that it was self-harm and that nobody else did it. This is all concocted very cleverly. So the question is, was it part of a larger plan that they actually didn't expect her to survive? Was Lawford an accomplice? Just asking questions here, not making any aspersions. If he was really worried, he was only minutes away from her house. I mean, he lived in Santa Monica. He could have gotten there quite easily. Rudin let slip that he talked to Eunice, who was in the guest cottage. He let that slip. So how did he know she was in the guest cottage? She didn't say, hi, this is Eunice Murray speaking from the guest cottage. Yeah, that just wasn't, why was her location relevant, and why did they feel the need to mention it? Eunice's version, okay. She wrote in her book, she wrote a book, of course, because everybody does, even OJ. She claimed that Rudin called her at 10 to ask if Marilyn was okay, and she replied, I think so. Do you want me to go and check? And he supposedly said, no, don't bother her. It seems, where did I go? I'm sorry, I'm skipping around here. Okay, so quite apparently somebody lied because these stories are all contradictory. The timeline is all over the place. Evidence suggests Marilyn was in the guest cottage at 10, and we're going to go deeper into that. Lawford called Evans. Evans called Rudin. Rudin calls probably to get, probably the point of all this phone chain was to check and see if she was sedated enough to let the AG return and do his search. There's a piece of unexplained evidence. Dr. Engelberg told the first cop on the scene that lately he'd been giving Marilyn injections for diarrhea. Okay. These meds can cause constipation, but so could overuse of barbiturates, and she's been overprescribed. Even today, people think if the doctor gives you a prescription, it's okay to take it. And it never occurs to people that they may be getting too much. They may know they're liking it, but they may not realize how dangerous that is. And especially in the 60s, there was less public service information, about this kind of thing. They were passing pills out like candy. And she may not have realized the long-term effects and the dangers of mixing stuff. Pain pills, you know, barbiturates will constipate you. I can't believe I'm talking about this. Barbiturates will constipate you, but also opioids will constipate you. There's a whole string of drugs that have side effects that you don't really think about much, but you can get in a lot of discomfort and possible trouble, you know, end up with a torsion in your bowel because of it. So it has to be really carefully monitored, and it doesn't sound like that's what was going on here. Anyway, it seems like the doctor is offering up this really kind of odd information to give to the cop. Were they trying to explain away injections, or what were they trying to explain away? So in the morning, Ralph said she was fine that morning, Saturday morning, that she had ordered dinner. He confirmed that she'd ordered dinner, but her stomach was empty. And by then, was she feeling intestinal discomfort? Hours had gone by. She ordered the food, but now she's like, oh God. That's very likely possible. Why was she in the guest house? Did she go to give herself an enema? Now, at first when I read this, I thought, oh, okay, now we're getting kind of, you know, fringy here. But then it starts to make sense when you think about it. They were doing remodeling on the bathroom in the other house, and she had company. She had two bathrooms. One was her bathroom. It had no water at the moment. The other bathroom was right across the door from the room where Murray and her son-in-law were watching television. So, you know, you might not want to be doing an enema with people, you know. So the speculation is she was having discomfort in her gut for whatever reason. I'm just going to throw this out here. It's kind of a funny feeling I got. Was she dabbling a little bit in eating disorders? I wonder about that, because apparently she had a standing order at the pharmacy for enemas. She was also on a lot of barbiturates. Anyway, the water in the main bathroom was shut off because they were doing repairs, and she may have been avoiding using the smaller bathroom in the house because Eunice and Jeffries were on the other side of the door watching TV. The autopsy showed that her colon had been very recently irritated by an acidic liquid. Now, that would not be the kind of enema that she bought. And I can't believe we're talking about this. So, Fleet's enema, I'm sure anybody who's had a colonoscopy might be familiar with this. This is a Fleet's enema. It comes prepackaged. All you have to do is open it and have fun, you know. And she had a standing order, as I said, for several of those on a regular basis at her house, which I really find odd. But the liquid in there should be pretty non-irritating, not to the extent of what they found. The pharmacy receipts show that she often bought Fleet's enemas and used them frequently over the years, and they're very easily self-administered. I invite anybody who needs to try it. Go ahead. This would make it very easy for someone in her house to surreptitiously open the bottle, pour out some of the liquid, open up some Nembutal capsules, empty the powder into the remaining liquid, and screw the cap back on. She'd been unaware that the bottle was tampered with, it wouldn't show, and contained a lethal dose of a powerful sedative. She'd end her own life while giving herself this enema without even intending to, and if it happened this way, it could fairly be said that she did it and somebody else did it. Wow. So this would, maybe the intention was to knock her out enough to keep her out of the way of the AG while he searched. And there is evidence that her body was moved. Only 3 people likely knew that she planned to do an enema. Dr. Greenson, Eunice, and Pat Newcomb. So where am I here? numbers wrong here. Okay, no, that's right. Okay, so was she sedated first with chloral hydrate? It was slipped to her, maybe by Eunice, maybe in that big bottle of Coke. Like, what's going on here? And then she was given an enema once she was sedated. The doctor's daughter, Joan, said that he would often tamper with Marilyn's drugs if he thought Engelbert had prescribed too much. So he would open a capsule and pour some out and put the capsule back together again. Unbelievable. Did Dr. Greenson lace this enema with Nembutal? Was this the missing bottle of Nembutal that Marilyn asked the doctor about on the phone? Kind of logical. The doctor would mention it to the police to create a narrative that he didn't know she had any. Okay. Someone in her house had to replace the empty Nembutal by her bed and throw out the enema bottle. This was thought out. This wasn't some spontaneous weirdness. In the comment that Eunice Murray made that the press never followed up on, she revealed that Dr. Greenson, quote, gave me certain instructions about Marilyn, but I can't say what they were. What? What was so secretive? The news media were too busy chasing false leads to challenge Eunice to elaborate, and the local authorities were obviously not interested in the truth. I would say actively avoiding the truth. Dr. Cyril Wecht, and if you watch any true crime, Dr. Cyril Wecht is a star of the genre. He's a forensic pathologist. He recently died. It's very sad. He was quite aged. But he is one of the most, was one of the most reactive, unreactive, balanced, really articulate, really intelligent people in the true crime field. He was aghast when he heard that the doctor had tampered with Marilyn's prescriptions. He said, his quote was, "This is wrong. This is terrible. This is criminal." At 8:35, there was a call to Ralph Roberts' service, and a message was left, and it was a fuzzy-voiced woman. It had to be Marilyn. Who else would it be? And she was already drugged. She was already feeling the effect. And she had just talked to Sydney. So it took effect pretty quickly. So a consideration is the enema, this is getting kind of grim, might not have stayed inside of her because it causes internal burning. And therefore, maybe the drug absorption wasn't what they thought it was going to be. And she was able to call Ralph. And she might have been still awake enough to confront the AG because he came back. Witnesses. Pat Newcomb showed up at Lawford's at 9:30ish and announced, okay, so she goes to Lawford's house and she announces, "Peter, Marilyn is not coming to dinner. Marilyn is not coming to dinner. She's not feeling well." Was this code so that he would know that she was feeling the effects of the drug? Because she would have already known that she wasn't coming. He would have already known that because Eunice told him she was in bed asleep, ostensibly. So what happened with Newcomb's date that she was supposed to be on? Was she just meeting up with the AG? What time did she leave Marilyn's house? It's just all these unanswered questions. She arrived at Lawford's in pajamas with the coat on and still was dressed that way hours later back at Marilyn's when the body was found. Who wears that to a party? As the dinner party she showed up at. And who continues to wear that to go to work the next morning? Very odd. Was she at Marilyn's when Marilyn died? That's the big question. Lawford later told the journalist Earl Wilson that Newcomb never came to his house that night. And I wrote, WTF, there were other guests there who saw her. The first cop on the scene was suspicious that Newcomb stayed longer than she claimed she stayed at Marilyn's. that she stayed after Dr. Greenson left. So we don't know here. Chapter 46, the AG returns to search Marilyn's house, and she dies. Jeffries, handyman, had stuck around to help Eunice pack. So here Eunice is telling the cops all these stories about big plans that she had with Marilyn and how great they were getting along. Her son-in-law is helping her pack because she's been fired. She got a call from Dr. Greenson, and he asked her to stay the night with Marilyn. He was in the back bedroom, Jeffries was in the back bedroom watching TV about 9:30 or 10 when the AG unexpectedly showed up with 2 other men, and Jeffries described them as government men. I wonder if they had little earpieces and sunglasses. He never said when, where Marilyn was in the house, if she was awake or asleep. And it was unlikely that he was paying attention. He was in this one bedroom watching television with the door shut. Did Newcomb stay until Marilyn was sedated, let the AG know the coast was clear, and then leave for the Lawfords? That sounds like one possibility. The AG ordered Jeffries and Eunice to leave. I think this is really interesting. He blusters into the house and he starts demanding that the 2 employees leave the house. So they went to the neighbor's house, who were associates of Dr. Greenson. Isn't that convenient? And they're talking about what house that they go to, possibly Abe Landau and his wife, who lived at the corner of the block, and the Landaus were not home. They were at a party, and they got back before midnight, but Jeffries and Murray may have just sat outside at this house. Since it was down the block, they wouldn't have been close enough to actually observe or hear what was happening at Marilyn's house, but they would have seen the car with 3 men leave and know that the coast was clear, because it would have to go right past them. It was not a through street. It was a dead end with a cul-de-sac, so there was no traffic other than what would have come from Marilyn's house. So this is just process of elimination, figuring out where they may have been, because they didn't tell the truth. Speculated that the AG was with 2 Los Angeles cops, Archie Case and James Ahern, part of the Gangster Squad. Gangster Squad of these bad guys, and friends of the AG. They had a history of illegal black bag ops. So Case's son-in-law was accidentally shot. Oh no, I'm sorry, I said that wrong. Case's son-in-law accidentally shot Case's daughter, Beverly, in the head. He said they were hugging, and he threw his gun over her shoulder into a drawer, and it went off and hit her in the head, shot her in the head. Now there's a magic bullet. Case got his son-in-law acquitted by inquest in 15 minutes, the day after the shooting. Oh, okay. Both of these cops investigated the Black Dahlia mystery. We might have to cover that. There's a book. Well, there are a number of books. We'll talk about it. And in the Black Dahlia case, it became really apparent that the LAPD was rotten to the core. There was a dangerous psychopath on the loose that killed this young woman, the Black Dahlia. And the facts about the case were suppressed. There's so much about that case that was suppressed. Witnesses who did know something were harassed. The investigation was abruptly ended. The case files are still locked up. Who does this sound like? The Gangster Squad planted bugs. They did favors for Jack Webb of Dragnet fame. They neutralized pesky newspaper columnists. I don't know what that means, but I think they strong-armed them. They intimidated witnesses in They would take them to the Hollywood Hills, which very deserted, to Mulholland, which is just like a deserted road with no lights and no buildings and a sheer drop, and the panoramic view of LA, and they take them up to Mulholland and pull them out of the car and hold a gun to their heads. They destroyed the business of one guy. I mean, they actually literally went to the business and trashed it and shaved him bald. They rousted 6 out-of-towners from the Midwest who were riding in a limo on Wilshire Boulevard. They booked them on suspicion of robbery, though they had committed no crime. They then invited the press in to photograph the criminals who were never charged. Other cops suspected the members of the Gangster squad, like 250-pound Archie Case, that were internal spies, headhunters, and enforcers. As the LA Times summarized, there were close calls, grand jury investigations, lawsuits, and a skeptical chief or two, but they endured. So these are the 2 rogue cops that the AG brought with them to her house. And he was reckless. He knew that house was bugged. Arrogant, right? He and his 2 brothers, the older one and the younger one, they had an image as devoted family men and faithful husbands. But all 3 were predators, and the Secret Service and their wives knew it. If not at Marilyn's, why did he stay in LA till the next morning? He didn't have any business there. His family was waiting for him north. They know he was there because they got pulled over for speeding when they left her house. Just like Son of Sam got caught with a parking ticket. Sidney Guilaroff's friend Paul Brogan said in an interview for this book that during his last chat with Marilyn, he was very clear that she was terrified as to what the Kennedys were planning to do to her. Sidney suggested she come to his home for the night if she was that scared. His sincere belief is that the brothers did her in much the same way the mob killed Mario Lanza several years earlier. It has been alleged that Lanza was murdered by the mafia because he refused to appear at a concert organized by gangster Lucky Luciano. Brogan recalled that when Sidney would talk about Marilyn, it was obvious that it was one of the most devastating things in his life and that he regretted not forcing her to come to his home that evening for safety. The common rumor, this is the common rumor now of what might have happened, and this is a rumor. A lot of interesting supporting evidence, but this is a rumor that they gave her an enema, but it was really not necessary. An insider could much easier just have spiked the Fleet's enema. Their mission was to search and find the diary and the tapes that she'd made, because she was taping conversations. Colleen Otash, who was the daughter of Fred Otash, the spy guy, says that she found his files after he died. In 1992, he said in a file that he heard her die on a tape. On a bug, that he had put after a violent argument with the AG. She was screaming and they were trying to quieten her down. She's in the bedroom and the AG gets the pillow and muffles her on the bed to keep the neighbors from hearing. She finally quieted down and then he was looking to get out of there. Allegedly. She has been reported by many as being a great screamer. It's one of her talents. The FBI proof that, there is FBI proof that Otash was bugging the place at that time. So that's not even a debate. Marilyn had fresh bruises on her back had she been held down. Did they go too far by accident? The AG is known for a lack of impulse control. And the book gives examples. He got into bar fights, and I just, you know, it's terrible. He did not cope well with being defied. A.G. and these two guys, they were in and out of there very quickly. Did they leave her to die? And then the question is like Ted at Chappaquiddick? Okay, I'm going to stop here because it's the end of this chapter. It's a good place to stop. So that's the end of video number 16. And I hope this is still keeping your attention. This is like a movie that you would say, oh, this is too much. This couldn't possibly have happened. Except it did. So I'm trying not to get too engaged in the sadness of the whole thing and the tragedy of it. Yeah, I prefer to live in anger. So thank you very much for watching, and I hope you'll come back for the rest of this book. There's only a couple of more videos left, and it's quite a story. So, it's long foil, sláinte.